In 1997, James Cameron was standing on the deck of a ship that was about to sink. Not a real ship, a 90% scale replica of the RMS Titanic, built in a 17 million gallon tank on the coast of Baja California, Mexico. The production had gone over budget by roughly $100 million. The shooting schedule had stretched from 138 days to 160. Multiple crew members had been injured. The press was calling it the biggest disaster in Hollywood history. Paramount and 20th Century Fox, who were splitting the costs because neither studio was willing to gamble that much money alone, were seriously considering shutting the whole thing down. And in the middle of all this, Cameron did something that I think tells you everything you need to know about the kind of filmmaker he is. He gave up his salary, his entire directing fee, $8 million, gone. He forfeited his back-end profit participation. He told the studio, in what has become one of the most quoted lines in Hollywood business history, "I'll give you my fee. I'll do the film for free, but you have to let me finish it." The studio executives looked at a director who was offering to work for nothing on a film that everyone in the industry was betting would fail. And they thought, either this man is insane, or he knows something we don't. He knew something they didn't. Titanic went on to earn $2.2 billion worldwide. It won 11 Academy Awards, tying Ben-Hur for the most Oscars ever won by a single film. It held the record for the highest grossing movie of all time for 12 years. And the director, who gave up his salary because nobody believed in his vision, eventually earned more from the film's profits than any director's fee could have provided. The gamble paid off. Not because Cameron was lucky, because Cameron was right. And being right, when $200 million and two studios and an entire industry's skepticism are stacked against you, is a very specific kind of genius. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because the story of how Titanic got made is almost as dramatic as the film itself. And it starts not with a script or a studio pitch, but with a man who wanted to go look at a dead ship at the bottom of the ocean. James Cameron's obsession with the Titanic did not begin as a movie idea. It began as a desire to dive to the wreck. He was a deep-sea exploration enthusiast before he was a filmmaker, or at least the two obsessions ran in parallel for most of his career. When he pitched Titanic to the studio, his primary motivation was not, I want to make a love story set on a sinking ship. His primary motivation was, I want to use the studio's money to fund deep-sea dives to the actual Titanic wreck site. The film was, in Cameron's mind, partly a vehicle for getting a $100 million production budget that would finance his real passion, deep ocean exploration. This sounds cynical, but it's not. Cameron has been transparent about it. He wanted to see the wreck with his own eyes. He wanted to film it. He wanted to descend 2.5 miles below the surface of the Atlantic and touch the railing that passengers had touched in 1912. And he did. He made 12 dives to the wreck during pre-production. The footage from those dives appears in the film The Opening Sequence, where the submersibles explore the sunken ship, is real. That's the actual Titanic. Those are real rooms, real staircases, real chandeliers covered in 85 years of biological growth. Cameron went to the bottom of the ocean and brought back footage that no one had ever seen before. And then he built a 3-hour movie around it. He has since returned to the wreck site over 30 times. The last Titanic film, he could have made the easy version. The commercial version would have been a straightforward disaster movie. Cameron made a love story instead. And then he went back to the bottom of the ocean because the movie was never the point. The ocean was the point. The movie was the excuse. Now I want to talk about the production itself, because what happened during the making of Titanic is one of the most chaotic, dangerous, and ultimately rewarding production stories in cinema history. And it starts with the cast. Leonardo DiCaprio almost wasn't Jack Dawson. This isn't one of those, they also considered someone else casting stories. DiCaprio actively did not want the part. When Cameron invited him to audition, DiCaprio showed up thinking it was a meeting, just a conversation about the role. Cameron told him to come back the next day to read with Kate Winslet. DiCaprio said, "Oh, I don't read." Cameron's response, and this has been confirmed by multiple people who were in the room, was to turn off the camera, look DiCaprio in the eye, and say, "Well, I appreciate you coming over. Thanks for your time." He started to walk away. DiCaprio, realizing that the role was about to disappear, asked what was happening. Cameron told him, "This is a screen test. I don't hire actors without screen testing them. You can either read for me right now, or you can leave." DiCaprio read. The test was extraordinary. Cameron has said that every woman in my office was crowded around the monitor. And when Leo started to read, they all started swooning. He got the part. But the dynamic between Cameron and DiCaprio, the tension between a director who demands total control and an actor who doesn't like being told what to do, persisted throughout the entire production. They respected each other. They did not always like each other. And the film is better for it because that tension, the clash between a meticulous filmmaker and a spontaneous performer, produces a kind of electricity that neither could generate alone. Before DiCaprio, Cameron considered multiple actors for Jack. Johnny Depp was offered the role and turned it down, a decision he has since called one of the biggest regrets of his career. Jared Leto was approached but refused to audition. Matthew McConaughey expressed interest. Chris O'Donnell was in the conversation. Tom Cruise had a general meeting about it. The list of actors who were considered, approached, or who turned down the role of Jack Dawson is basically a roster of every young male star in 1990s Hollywood. The fact that DiCaprio got the part almost by accident because he showed up thinking it was a casual meeting and then was essentially bullied into reading is one of those casting stories that makes you believe in fate. Or at least in directors who are too stubborn to take no for an answer. Kate Winslet's path to Rose was very different. She wanted the part desperately. She pursued Cameron aggressively. She sent him a rose with a note that read, "From your Rose." When that didn't immediately secure a response, she called him directly, reportedly multiple times. She has described her approach as stalking Cameron until he agreed to audition her. Winslet was 21 at the time and had been acting professionally since childhood. She understood something about the role that the other actresses being considered, Gwyneth Paltrow, Claire Danes, Gabrielle Anwar may not have grasped. Rose is not a damsel. Rose is a survivor. She begins the film as a woman trapped by her class, her family, and her engagement to a man she doesn't love. She ends the film as a woman who has lost everything and chosen to build a new life from the wreckage. That arc from ornament to human being requires an actress who can be both fragile and ferocious. Sometimes in the same scene, Winslet could do that. She could be a porcelain doll in one frame and a woman capable of spitting in a man's face in the next. The chemistry between DiCaprio and Winslet is legendary. But what most people don't know is that their off-screen relationship was more like siblings than lovers. They have both described each other as best friends who never had any romantic interest in each other. The love scenes were, by Winslet's account, deeply awkward to film. The drawing scene where Jack sketches Rose nude was particularly uncomfortable because Cameron himself drew the portrait. Those are not Leonardo DiCaprio's hands holding the charcoal. Those are James Cameron's. The director drew the sketch of his own leading lady, in character as his own leading man, and the result sold at auction for £10,000 in 2011. There's something wonderfully absurd about that. The most famous drawing in cinema was done by the director, not the actor, and the model was trying not to laugh. Cameron also insisted on filming the drawing scene on the first day that DiCaprio and Winslet worked together. This was deliberate. He wanted to get the most awkward scene out of the way immediately, so that everything that followed would feel easy by comparison. It's a smart psychological tactic if you've already been naked on camera with someone on day 1. Sitting in a car together on day 30 feels like nothing. Now, let's talk about the ship. Because the ship is a character in this film in a way that no other prop or set in cinema history has ever been. And the story of how it was built is its own kind of epic. Cameron built a replica of the Titanic. Not a small model, not a soundstage with some walls and corridors. A ship, 90% scale, 775 feet long. It was constructed in a purpose-built studio facility in Rosarito, Mexico, which Cameron's production company essentially built from scratch. The facility included the ship, a 17 million gallon water tank, and multiple sound stages. The studio did not exist before Titanic. Cameron created it because no existing facility on Earth could accommodate what he wanted to do. The ship was built on one side, only the starboard side. All of the set dressing, all of the exterior details, all of the deck furniture was on one side. The other side was exposed steel framework. This meant that every scene that was supposed to take place on the port side of the ship had to be filmed on the starboard side and then mirror flipped in post-production. All of the signage on the ship was printed in reverse so that when the image was flipped, it would read correctly. All of the actors' hair was parted on the wrong side for the same reason. Every detail had to be backwards so that it would appear correct after the flip. The sinking sequence, the climax of the film, the part where the ship breaks apart and plunges into the Atlantic, required 17 million gallons of water to be released in controlled stages over multiple nights of filming. The water was heated to a comfortable temperature for the first few weeks of water work. But as the budget ballooned and the schedule stretched, The heating was reduced and eventually eliminated. By the final weeks of the sinking chute, the water was cold, not movie cold, actually cold. Kate Winslet got pneumonia. Multiple crew members and extras suffered from hypothermia. People were in genuine physical distress, and Cameron kept filming. This is the part of the Titanic production story where Cameron's reputation shifts from obsessive genius to obsessive tyrant. And I think both descriptions are accurate. He screamed at crew members. He fired people who questioned his decisions. He was physically aggressive with equipment and verbally aggressive with human beings. The set was described by multiple crew members as a hostile work environment. Winslet herself said she would not work with Cameron again unless she earned a lot of money. She later softened on this. But the comment tells you something about what the experience was like for the people involved. And yet, the footage is extraordinary. The sinking sequence shot practically, with real water and real people, and a set that actually tilted and broke apart on hydraulic lifts, remains one of the most technically impressive achievements in the history of cinema. The reason it looks so real is because, in many ways, it was real. The water was real. The cold was real. The panic on the actors' faces was, at least partly, real. Cameron created conditions so extreme that the line between performance and survival blurred. Whether that makes him a genius or a monster depends on which value you prioritize, the art or the artist's obligation to the people who make the art possible. I have complicated feelings about this. I think you should too. Let me tell you about one more production incident that I think captures the sheer insanity of what it was like to make this film. During the night shoots for the sinking sequence, someone spiked the crew's food, specifically the chowder served at the catered dinner with PCP. Angel dust. Over 80 people were hospitalized, including Cameron himself. 80 people, taken to a Spital's in Ensenada, Mexico, in the middle of the night, hallucinating, vomiting, unable to stand. The perpetrator was never caught. The investigation went cold. Cameron has described the experience as the most surreal night of my life, which is saying something given that his life includes 12 dives to the wreck of the actual Titanic and directing two of the highest-grossing films in cinema history. The drugging incident did not stop production. They were back on set the next night. Cameron lost a day, not a week. The schedule was too tight and the money was too deep to stop for something as mundane as 80 people being poisoned. That is the level of momentum the production had achieved. An actual crime committed against the crew was treated as a delay, not a crisis. Whether this says more about Cameron's determination or about Hollywood's dysfunction is a question I'll leave for you to answer. Now, let me talk about a few specific scenes and what makes them work. Because I think Titanic is a film where the craftsmanship is so seamless that most viewers don't consciously notice what Cameron is doing. They just feel it. I'm the king of the world. Everybody knows this line. Everybody has heard it quoted, parodied, referenced, shouted from the bow of every cruise ship by every tourist who thinks they're being original. But the scene itself, the moment where Jack stands on the bow of the Titanic and spreads his arms as the ship cuts through the ocean, is doing something more specific than it appears. The scene is about freedom. Jack is a steerage passenger. He has no money, no status, no cabin. He won his ticket in a poker game 5 minutes before the ship sailed. He has nothing, and for one moment, standing on the bow, with the wind in his face and the ocean ahead and nothing behind him that he needs to go back to, he has everything. The line is not about arrogance. It's about the intoxication of possibility. The feeling that you are moving towards something and nothing can stop you. It's the most American line in a film about a British ship, and it works because DiCaprio delivers it with the kind of joy that only comes from genuinely believing it. The scene also establishes something important about the ship itself. Cameron shoots the Titanic from below, from water level, making it look enormous. The ship is a cathedral, a floating city, an engineering achievement so vast that standing on its bow makes you feel like a god, and that feeling, that hubris, that unsinkable confidence is the exact feeling that will doom every person aboard. The ship's grandeur is its flaw. The same arrogance that built it is the arrogance that ignored the iceberg warnings. Cameron puts you on the bow with Jack and makes you feel invincible. And then he spends the next 2 hours showing you what happens when invincibility meets ice. The dinner scene where Jack joins Rose, Cal, and the first-class passengers for dinner is one of the most carefully constructed class critique sequences I've ever seen in a mainstream Hollywood film. Jack is wearing a borrowed tuxedo. He doesn't know which fork to use. He doesn't understand the social codes, and yet he's the most alive person at the table. He tells stories, he makes people laugh, he connects with strangers in ways that the first-class passengers, trapped in their etiquette and their expectations, cannot. The scene's thesis is clear. Class is a cage. Money buys you silverware and correct posture. It does not buy you joy. Jack has joy. Cal has silverware, and the film never lets you forget which one matters more. The steerage party, the scene where Jack takes Rose below deck to dance with the third-class passengers, is the visual opposite of the dinner. It's loud, sweaty, chaotic, alive. Rose is wearing a fine dress in a room full of working-class immigrants, and she has never been happier. The scene is shot in warm tones, with handheld cameras, with a kinetic energy that the first-class scenes deliberately lack. Cameron is using cinematography as class commentary. The rich world is static, composed, cold. The poor world is moving, breathing, warm. The camera tells you which world is better before anyone says a word. And then there's the car scene. Jack and Rose in the back of a vintage car in the cargo hold. The hand on the fogged window. This scene was rated PG-13, despite being, by any reasonable interpretation, a sex scene in a car. Cameron has talked about how he negotiated with the MPAA to keep the scene in the film without an R rating. The key was the hand on the window. It suggests everything without showing anything. The audience fills in the blank. And the blank they fill in is more powerful than anything Cameron could have filmed explicitly. Because imagination is always more vivid than photography. That hand on the window became one of the most iconic images in cinema. It's been parodied thousands of times. It appears on merchandise. It's referenced in other films and television shows, and it exists because a director found a way to show a sex scene without showing a sex scene, which is, when you think about it, the same skill set he used to build the entire film, show enough to make the audience feel it, withhold enough to make them imagine the rest. The gap between what's shown and what's imagined is where Titanic lives. Now, here is something about the Titanic production that I find genuinely fascinating from a filmmaking perspective, and it has to do with time. The film runs 3 hours and 14 minutes. The sinking sequence from the moment the iceberg strikes to the moment the ship disappears beneath the surface takes approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes of screen time. The actual Titanic sank in approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes. Cameron matched the real-time timeline of the disaster almost exactly. This was deliberate. He wanted the audience to experience the sinking in something close to real time, to feel the minutes pass, to understand how long 2 hours and 40 minutes actually is when you're standing on the deck of a ship that is slowly disappearing into freezing water. Most disaster films compress time. They show you the highlights, the big explosions, the dramatic rescues, the heroic moments, and skip the waiting. Cameron refused to skip the waiting. He showed you the waiting. He showed you people standing on a tilting deck with nothing to do but watch the water rise. He showed you the band playing. He showed you the old couple lying in bed together, holding hands, as the water creeps under their door. He showed you the mother reading a bedtime story to her children in steerage, knowing there are no lifeboats left. Those quiet moments, the ones between the action set pieces, are what make Titanic devastating rather than just spectacular. Any director can show you a ship sinking. Cameron showed you what it feels like to be on a ship that is sinking. The difference is time. The difference is patience. The difference is trusting the audience to sit with discomfort instead of cutting to another explosion. And I want to expand on this idea of quiet devastation because I think it's the single most important creative decision Cameron made. And it's the one that separates Titanic from every other disaster film ever made. There is a scene brief, maybe 30 seconds, where a mother in steerage tucks her children into bed. The water is rising. There are no more lifeboats. She knows they are going to die. She also knows her children don't understand what's happening. So she reads them a story. She smooths the blanket, and the camera holds on her face as she turns back toward the door, knowing she will never leave this room. Cameron has said this scene is based on a real account from the sinking. A third-class passenger was reportedly seen by a surviving passenger putting her children to bed as the ship went down. She chose comfort over panic. She chose her children's peace over her own survival instinct. Cameron put it in the film because he understood that the most devastating thing about the Titanic disaster is not the scale of the death, it's the intimacy of it. 1,500 people died. Each of them died individually. Each of them had a last moment. And some of those last moments were not screaming or running. Some of them or reading a bedtime story. Cameron understood that the ocean is patient. The ship doesn't explode. It slowly, methodically, inevitably fills with water, deck by deck, until there is nothing left above the surface. And he filmed it with the same patience. The camera doesn't rush. The editing doesn't accelerate beyond what the moment requires. The film matches the ocean's tempo, relentless but unhurried. And by the time the stern rises and the ship breaks in half, you have been sitting with these people long enough that their deaths feel personal, not statistical, personnel. That is Cameron's greatest achievement with Titanic. Not the effects, not the ship, not the scale, the patience, the willingness to be slow when every instinct in Hollywood filmmaking tells you to be fast, the trust that the audience will stay if you give them something worth staying for. And what's worth staying for is not an explosion. It's a mother reading a bedtime story to children who will never wake up. There's one more production detail I want to mention before we move on, because it tells you something about the extremes Cameron was willing to go to for authenticity. The extras. During the sinking sequence, Cameron used approximately 100 stunt performers and 150 extras. These were real people in real water on a real set that was actually tilting, actually breaking apart, actually flooding. The hydraulic system that controlled the ship's tilt could raise the stern to an angle of over 60 degrees. Stunt performers slid down the deck, crashed into railings, fell into the water. The choreography required weeks of rehearsal. Every body that falls, every person that slides, every splash was planned and executed by someone who had practiced the fall dozens of times. But here's the thing that gets me. The extras who played passengers in the background, the ones who aren't stunt performers, who are just there to fill the frame, they're genuinely scared in some of those shots. You can see it. The water is real. The tilt is real. The cold is real. When the ship reaches its extreme angle and people start losing their grip and sliding toward the break point, some of those reactions are not acting. They are people on a movie set who are genuinely frightened by what is happening around them. And Cameron used those reactions. He kept the takes where the fear was real, because real fear looks different from performed fear. And the audience can tell the difference, even if they can't articulate what they're seeing. Let me talk about the real people for a moment. Because while Jack and Rose are fictional, they are not based on any specific couple who was on the actual Titanic. Almost everyone else in the film is real. And the way Cameron wove real historical figures into a fictional love story is one of the most impressive research achievements in blockbuster filmmaking. The musicians who keep playing as the ship sinks, that happened. The band, led by violinist Wallace Hartley, continued performing on deck as the Titanic went down. The exact playlist has been debated by historians for over a century. Some accounts say they played ragtime. Others say they played hymns. The most persistent legend is that the final song was Nearer, My God, to Thay, which is what Cameron uses in the film. Whether that specific hymn was actually the last piece of music performed on the Titanic is historically uncertain, but the image musicians playing as the water rises around them, continuing to make beauty in the face of certain death, is so powerful that it has become inseparable from the Titanic story itself. Cameron knew that he put it in the film, and every time someone watches it, they cry, not because of the acting, not because of the music, because of the idea that someone, somewhere, in the worst moment of their life, chose to play a violin instead of running. The elderly couple lying in bed together as the water fills their room, Thomas and Ida Straus. Thomas was the co-owner of Macy's department store. When the lifeboats were being loaded, Ida was offered a seat. She refused to leave her husband. "I will not be separated from my husband," she reportedly said. "As we have lived, so will we die together." They were last seen sitting together on deck chairs as the ship went down. Cameron filmed their death as one of the quietest, most devastating moments in the film. No screaming, no panic, just two old people holding each other in a bed as the water creeps in. It takes maybe 15 seconds of screen time. It is, for my money, the most heartbreaking moment in the entire movie. Not because of the spectacle, because of the stillness. Margaret Molly Brown, played by Kathy Bates in the film, was a real person who became famous precisely because of her behavior during the sinking. She helped other passengers into lifeboats. She reportedly threatened the crewman operating her lifeboat with an oar when he refused to go back for survivors. She became known as the unsinkable Molly Brown, a nickname she earned that night and carried for the rest of her life. Bates has said she was terrified of the water scenes, but felt she owed it to the real Molly Brown to not be a coward about it. Captain Edward Smith, played by Bernard Hill, went down with his ship. The historical record is unclear on exactly how he died. Some accounts say he was last seen on the bridge as the water engulfed it. Others say he was seen in the water, swimming toward a lifeboat, and then turning away. Cameron chose the bridge version, a captain standing at the wheel, watching through the windows as the Atlantic pours in. It is an image of duty and acceptance that says everything about a certain kind of masculine code that existed in 1912 and that the film treats with genuine respect, even as it critiques the class system that the same code reinforced. The real J, Bruce Ismay, the White Star Line chairman who pressured the captain to increase speed and then survived by climbing into a lifeboat, lived the rest of his life under a cloud of shame. He was called a coward by the press. He was investigated by both the American and British governments. He never fully recovered from the public perception that he had prioritized his own survival over the passengers in his care. Cameron's portrayal of Ismay, played by Jonathan Hyde, is unflattering but not entirely unsympathetic. You can see the moment where Ismay makes his choice. You can see him looking at the lifeboat. You can see the calculation, and you can see the shame that follows immediately, before the boat has even hit the water. Cameron gives him enough humanity to make the cowardice feel real rather than cartoonish, which makes it worse. Cartoons don't make you uncomfortable. Real people do. The film includes dozens of other historical figures in smaller roles. The ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, who realized the ship was doomed and spent the final hours helping passengers find life jackets. The first officer, William Murdoch, whose death in the film became controversial because his real-life family objected to the portrayal. Benjamin Guggenheim, who reportedly changed into evening dress and declared, "We've dressed up in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." Each of these people existed. Each of them died. And Cameron put them in his fictional love story because he understood something important. The love story means nothing if the disaster doesn't feel real. And the disaster doesn't feel real unless the people in it are real. This is what separates Titanic from every other disaster movie. The disaster is not the point. The people are the point. The disaster is just the mechanism that reveals who they are. Some of them are heroes. Some of them are cowards. Most of them are somewhere in between ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, making decisions they never imagined they'd have to make. Cameron gave each of them exactly enough screen time to feel like a person rather than a statistic. 1,500 people died on the Titanic. Cameron made you care about each one of them for the few seconds they appeared on screen. That is an astonishing achievement of economy and empathy. Now, I want to talk about the music. Because the score of Titanic, composed by James Horner, is one of the most successful film scores in history. And the story of how it was created is its own kind of drama. Cameron did not want a pop song. This is important to understand. Cameron's vision for the film was serious, epic, historically grounded. He did not want a Celine Dion ballad playing over the credits. He thought a pop song would cheapen the film, would reduce a 3-hour historical epic to a music video. He resisted the idea for months. James Horner went behind Cameron's back. He and songwriter Will Jennings wrote "My Heart Will Go On in Secret." They recorded a demo with Celine Dion. Then Horner played it for Cameron. Cameron was furious, not because the song was bad, but because Horner had gone around him. The relationship between the director and the composer was already tense. This made it worse, but the song was undeniable. Cameron listened to it and knew, despite his objections, that it worked. He agreed to include it, but only over the end credits. Not during the film itself. He did not want the song interfering with the emotional experience of the movie. The audience would hear it only after the story was over, as they were processing what they had just seen. That placement, credits only, not during the film, was Cameron's compromise, and it was the right call. Because the song hits differently when you've just spent 3 hours watching 1,500 people die. It's not a pop song anymore. It's a eulogy. Celine Dion recorded the vocal in one take. One take. She walked into the studio, sang it once, and walked out. The version you hear on the soundtrack, the version that went to #1 in over 25 countries, that won the Academy Award for Best Original Song, that became one of the best-selling singles of all time, is a first take. Dion has said she didn't think much of the song initially. She recorded it as a favor to Horner, whom she had worked with before. She did not expect it to become the defining song of her career. The score itself, separate from the pop song, is one of Horner's finest achievements. He used a combination of orchestral composition and electronic elements, incorporating Irish folk instrumentation, tin whistles, wee lean pipes, bow-drawn drums to give the music a Celtic quality that connects the Titanic story to the broader tradition of Irish emigration. Many of the passengers in steerage were Irish immigrants heading to America. The music tells their story even when the script doesn't. Horner's working relationship with Cameron was famously difficult. The two men argued constantly during the scoring process. Cameron wanted the music to be more restrained. Horner wanted it to be more emotional. The tension produced a score that is simultaneously controlled and devastating. The orchestra holds back, holds back, holds back, and then releases in moments of overwhelming beauty or overwhelming horror. The restraint makes the release more powerful. If the score were emotional all the time, it would be exhausting because it withholds. When it finally gives, it gives everything. Horner died in a plane crash in 2015. He was 61. The Titanic score remains one of the most listened to film scores in history. And My Heart Will Go On remains one of the most recognizable songs on earth. But the song's cultural journey is its own kind of story, and it mirrors the film's journey in ways I think are worth examining. In 1998, the song was everywhere. Radio, television, shopping malls, elevators, weddings, funerals, karaoke bars. It was inescapable. And like anything inescapable, it eventually became annoying. By the early 2000s, My Heart Will Go On had transitioned from beloved ballad to cultural punchline. People groaned when it came on. DJs played it ironically. It became the go-to example of a song that had been overplayed to the point of exhaustion. Dion herself grew tired of performing it. She said in interviews that there were periods where she dreaded singing it live because the song had become bigger than she was. A monster she created in one take that refused to die. And then something shifted. Around the time of the film's 3D re-release in 2012, and especially after Dion was diagnosed with stiff person syndrome in 2022, the song underwent a quiet rehabilitation. People who had spent years making fun of it started listening to it again, not ironically, but sincerely. The song that was a joke became a comfort, the same way the film that was a punchline became a classic. The arc is identical. Beloved, overexposed, mocked, missed, rediscovered, beloved again. The song and the film traveled the same road, just on different timelines. I think this happens because time changes the meaning of things. In 1998, My Heart Will Go On was a pop song about a movie in 2025. It's a song about loss performed by a woman who is losing her ability to perform. The context has changed. The notes haven't. And somehow, the same melody that sounded saccharine in a shopping mall in 1999 sounds devastating in a concert hall in 2024 when the woman singing it can barely stand. Whether Cameron ever fully made peace with the song's existence is unclear, but the fact that he included it reluctantly, grudgingly, against his own artistic instincts is a reminder that sometimes the best creative decisions are the ones you don't want to make. Now I want to step back and talk about Jack and Rose as characters, not the casting or the production, but the actual structure of who they are and why they work, because I think there's something happening with these two characters that is more sophisticated than most people give the film credit for. Jack Dawson is not a deep character. I want to say that up front because I think being honest about this is important. Jack is an archetype. He is the free spirit, the artist, the boy who has nothing and therefore has everything. He draws, he travels, he lives in the moment. He is every romantic fantasy about what it means to be young and unattached and alive. If you wrote Jack's personality on a piece of paper, it would look like a greeting card. There's nothing surprising about him. There is nothing contradictory. He is exactly what he appears to be, and that is precisely why he works. Jack's simplicity is not a flaw. It's a function. He exists in the film not as a fully realized human being, but as a catalyst. His purpose is to change Rose. He is the key. She is the lock. And the lock is infinitely more complex than the key, which is how it should be. Rose is the interesting character. Rose is the one with the arc. She begins the film as a woman who is essentially dead alive, physically, but dead spiritually, trapped in a gilded cage of wealth and expectation, and a fiancé who treats her like property. She is so empty that she tries to throw herself off the back of a ship, and then Jack catches her, not romantically, not yet, just literally catches her as she hangs off the stern, and something shifts. Not because Jack is special, because Jack sees her. Not her name, not her dress, not her class. Yeah, and being seen by someone truly seen, without the filter of social expectation, is the most revolutionary thing that has ever happened to Rose DeWitt Bukater. The arc of the film is Rose's liberation, not from the ship, from herself, from the version of herself that her mother created and Cal reinforced and society demanded. Jack is the instrument of that liberation, but Rose is the one who chooses it. She chooses to go to the steerage party. She chooses to stand on the bow. She chooses to take her clothes off. She chooses to stay with Jack when the ship is sinking. Every major decision in the film is Rose's decision. Jack suggests, Rose decides. That distinction matters because it means Rose is not a passive object being rescued by a charming boy. She is an active participant in her own transformation. The charming boy just showed her that transformation was possible. And the ending, the controversial ending, the one where old Rose drops the diamond into the ocean, is the final act of that liberation. The heart of the ocean diamond represents everything Rose was supposed to be precious, ornamental, valuable for what it is rather than who she is. By dropping it into the sea, she rejects everything. Cal and her mother and her social class tried to make her. She doesn't sell it. She doesn't keep it. She doesn't give it to a museum. She drops it into the same ocean that took Jack, into the same water that swallowed the life she was supposed to live. And she lets it go. The diamond goes where the ship went, where Jack went, where the old Rose went. And the new Rose, the one who lived, who rode horses and flew planes and did all the things Jack told her she would do, that Rose has no use for diamonds. She never did. Cameron has been asked why old Rose drops the diamond instead of selling it and using the money for charity or giving it to her granddaughter. His answer is characteristically direct. It's not about money. It's about letting go. And he's right. The diamond is not a financial asset. It's a symbol, and symbols don't belong in pawn shops. They belong at the bottom of the ocean with everything else that was lost that night. And since we're talking about Rose's liberation, I want to spend a moment on the man she's being liberated from. Because I think Billy Zane's performance as Cal Hockley is one of the most underappreciated villain performances in 90s cinema. Cal is easy to hate. He's arrogant. He's controlling. He slaps Rose across the face. He frames Jack for theft. He shoots at them during the sinking. He is, on the surface, a one-dimensional rich villain, the kind of character that exists only so the audience has someone to root against. But Zane brings something to Cal that the script doesn't quite demand, and it makes the character more disturbing than he has any right to be. Watch Cal's face in the moments where Rose defies him. Watch the confusion, not the anger, the confusion. Cal genuinely does not understand why Rose isn't happy. He has given her everything he knows how to give money. Status, a diamond the size of a small country. In Cal's world, these things are love. They are the only language he was taught. And when Rose rejects them when she runs to a steerage party instead of sitting at his dinner table, when she chooses a penniless artist over a millionaire industrialist, Cal's response isn't just anger, it's bewilderment. He's a man watching his operating system crash and not understanding why. There is one detail about Cal that I think contains a layer of irony so deep that it functions as its own kind of tragedy. When the ship is sinking, Cal puts the heart of the ocean diamond in the pocket of his coat. Then he puts the coat on Rose. He gives her the diamond, the symbol of his control, the object that represents everything he tried to make her, and by doing so, he accidentally finances her escape. The coat keeps her warm. The diamond, which she keeps hidden for 84 years, represents the wealth that Cal used as a cage, repurposed by Rose as a keepsake of the night she became free. The instrument of her imprisonment became the souvenir of her liberation, and Cal handed it to her himself. He doesn't know it. He never will. But there's a cosmic irony in the fact that the man who tried to own Rose is the one who accidentally funded her freedom. Zane has talked about playing Cal with some frustration. The role typecast him as a villain for years. Hollywood saw Cal and assumed Zane could only play monsters in suits. What they missed, what Zane brought, and what Cameron used was the vulnerability beneath the arrogance. Cal is not a good man, but he is a recognizable man. Every person who has ever tried to buy love instead of earning it is Cal. Every person who has confused possession with affection is Cal. The character works not because he's cartoonishly evil, but because he's cartoonishly common. There are Cals in every office building, every country club, every first-class cabin in the world. Zane just gave theirs a face. Let me talk about what happened when the film was released. Because the cultural impact of Titanic in 1997 and 1998 is difficult to overstate and nearly impossible to replicate. Titanic opened on December 19. Eats hin Joe by Joe should see. It was expected to fail. The press had spent months writing the production's obituary. The budget, $200 million. The most expensive film ever made at that point was considered obscene. The running time, 3 hours and 14 minutes, was considered commercial suicide. Studios do not release 3-hour love stories in December and expect them to make money. The conventional wisdom was clear. Titanic would be James Cameron's folly, the film that proved even the director of Terminator and Aliens could overreach. The conventional wisdom was wrong. Titanic opened to $28 million in its first weekend, which was considered modest by blockbuster standards. But it didn't drop. It didn't follow the normal pattern of a big opening weekend followed by a steep decline. It held week after week. The film maintained its box office position with minimal drop-off. People were going back multiple times. Some audience members saw the film in theaters 10, 15, 20 times. Teenage girls who became the film's most passionate audience segment drove repeat viewings that kept the film at or near the top of the box office for 15 consecutive weeks. By the time its theatrical run ended, Titanic had earned $1.8 billion worldwide in its initial release. A 3D re-release in 2012 pushed the total past $2.2 billion. It was the highest-grossing film of all time for 12 years. Until Cameron himself broke the record with Avatar in 2010. The man who held the record also broke it. With his own film, that's a flex that nobody in Hollywood history has matched. The cultural phenomenon extended far beyond the box office. Leonardo DiCaprio became the biggest movie star on the planet overnight. Leomania, a term coined by the press to describe the hysterical reaction of young female fans, was a genuine cultural event. DiCaprio was on every magazine cover, every TV show, every bus stop advertisement. He was mobbed at public appearances. He was screamed at by thousands of fans. He was, for a period of approximately 18 months, the most famous person on Earth. And here's the thing about Leomania that I find genuinely interesting. From a cultural perspective, DiCaprio hated it. He has been very open about the fact that the Titanic fame was overwhelming and uncomfortable. He didn't want to be a teen idol. He wanted to be a serious actor. The kind of adulation he received after Titanic, the screaming, the fainting, the posters on bedroom walls was exactly the kind of celebrity he was trying to avoid. His career choices after Titanic Gangs of New York, The Aviator, The Departed, Blood Diamond were deliberate acts of rebellion against the pretty boy image that Titanic had created. He chose roles that were ugly, difficult, morally ambiguous. He grew a beard, He gained weight. He did everything he could to destroy the image of Jack Dawson and replace it with something more complex. It worked. DiCaprio became one of the most respected actors of his generation. But it took over a decade. And the fact that it took that long, the fact that the shadow of Jack Dawson hung over his career for years, tells you something about the power of Titanic. The film was so culturally dominant that its lead actor spent the next 15 years trying to escape from it. Winslet's post-Titanic career took a different path. She didn't rebel against the fame the way DiCaprio did. She simply kept working, choosing roles in smaller films, Iris, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Little Children, the reader that showcased her range without relying on the blockbuster appeal of Titanic. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress for The Reader in 2009. 12 years after Titanic, the Oscar felt like a correction, the Academy finally recognizing a talent that Titanic had introduced to the world, but that the Titanic spectacle had overshadowed. DiCaprio and Winslet remained close friends throughout all of it. They walked each other down the aisle at weddings. They attended each other's premieres. They gave interviews where the affection between them was so obvious and so genuine that the press repeatedly asked whether they were secretly in love. They weren't. They never were. But the friendship, the real one, the one that survived fame and pressure and 2 decades of public scrutiny, became its own kind of love story. A better one, arguably, than the one in the film, because their story doesn't end with someone dying in the water. It ends with 2 people who got famous together and stayed friends anyway. In Hollywood, that might be the rarest achievement of all. The film's cultural footprint extended into territories nobody anticipated. Titanic mania hit particularly hard in Asia, where the film broke box office records in multiple countries. In China, the film earned nearly $45 million, an extraordinary sum for a Western film in the Chinese market in 1998. Chinese audiences connected with the class critique and the love story in ways that transcended cultural barriers. The phrase, "you jump, I jump," became a cultural reference point in Chinese popular culture that persists to this day. The parodies. Saturday Night Live did multiple Titanic sketches. Every late-night host referenced it. The "I'm the king of the world" pose became the default photo position for anyone standing on the bow of any boat anywhere in the world. The Mythbusters tested the door question. 1,000 YouTube videos analyzed the sinking physics. The film became such a permanent fixture of popular culture that referencing it required no context. You could say "draw me" like one of your French girls to anyone, anywhere, and they would know exactly what you meant. That is a level of cultural saturation that only a handful of films in history have ever achieved. And here's something I think about when I consider the film's legacy. Titanic was released in 1997, which means it exists in a very specific cultural window after the end of the Cold War. Before 9/11, in a period of relative stability and optimism that would not last. The film's themes: class, division, hubris, the illusion of safety, the discovery that the unsinkable can sink, resonate differently in different eras. In 1997, Titanic was a love story set against a disaster. after 2001, after 2008, after 2020, the disaster feels less like history and more like prophecy. The idea that a system everyone trusted, a system everyone called unsinkable, could fail catastrophically, killing the people who trusted it most, is not just a 19th century maritime tragedy. It's a 21st century parable. Cameron didn't intend this reading. He made a love story about a ship, but great films outlive their intentions. They mean different things to different generations. And Titanic, a film about the moment when human confidence meets the indifference of nature, keeps gaining meaning as the gap between what we build and what we can control continues to widen. The film also created a specific audience behavior that didn't exist before the repeat theatrical viewer. People saw Titanic in theaters 5, 10, 15, 20 times. This was before home video made rewatching easy, before streaming made it instantaneous. To see Titanic again in 1998, you had to go back to the theater, buy another ticket, sit in another seat, and watch the entire 3-hour and 14-minute film again. And millions of people did this, willingly, eagerly. The repeat viewing phenomenon was so significant that it became a news story in itself. Newspapers ran articles about teenagers who had seen the film 20 times, about couples who came back every weekend, about people who cried every single time and came back anyway. This behavior, returning to a film not because you forgot what happens, but because you want to feel it again, is the behavior of someone who has found comfort in a specific emotional experience. And that connects directly to the sleep format. People who watch Titanic to fall asleep are doing the same thing those 1,998 repeat viewers were doing, seeking a familiar emotional experience, a known rhythm, a story whose ending they already know. The certainty of the outcome is not a flaw. It's the feature. You know the ship will sink. You know Jack will die. You know Rose will survive. And that knowledge, that absolute, unshakable certainty about what's coming is paradoxically comforting. In a world where nothing is certain, a story with a guaranteed ending is a kind of anchor. You can close your eyes and let it carry you because you know exactly where it's going. The Oscars. Eleven wins. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, Best Original Score, Best Original Song, Best Sound Editing, Best Sound Mixing, Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, Best Visual Effects. 11 out of 14 nominations. It tied Ben-Hur's record for the most Academy Awards won by a single film. A record that stood until The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, matched it in 2004. Cameron's acceptance speech for Best Director has become legendary for a specific reason. He stood on stage, held up the Oscar, and shouted, "I'm the king of the world," quoting his own film. The audience reaction was mixed. Some people laughed. Some people cringed. Some people saw it as a charming moment of self-aware celebration. Others saw it as the worst kind of Hollywood ego. Cameron has since acknowledged that the line was a bit much, but he's also never apologized for it. And there's something very James Cameron about that, doing something excessive, knowing it's excessive, and refusing to pretend it wasn't exactly what he meant to do. Let me wind down with the details. The small ones. The ones Cameron obsessed over that most audiences will never notice, but that make the film feel like a time machine rather than a movie set. The china, the plates, cups, and saucers used in the dining scenes were reproductions of the actual White Star Line china patterns. Cameron's team sourced the original designs from archives and had them recreated by the same manufacturers, where possible, who had produced the originals in 1912. When you see a dinner plate in the first-class dining room, you are looking at an exact replica of the plate that would have been on that table on the real ship. Nobody in the audience notices the china pattern. Cameron didn't care. He needed it to be right. The carpet, the patterns on the carpet in the first-class corridors were reproduced from photographs of the original Titanic taken during the ship's construction, where photographs were unavailable. The production team used carpets from the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, which survived and whose interiors were photographed extensively. The carpet in the movie matches the carpet on the real ship to within a few shades of color variation. The stars. This is my favorite detail in the original 1997 release. The stars visible in the night sky during the sinking sequence were random, a generic star field that didn't correspond to any specific date or location. Astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson noticed this and contacted Cameron. He pointed out that for a film that was obsessive about historical accuracy in every other respect, the wrong stars were a glaring error. Cameron agreed. When the film was re-released in 3D in 2012, the starfield was corrected to show the actual stars that would have been visible from the North Atlantic on the night of April 14. Iten Jobai Ishir R., the most expensive film ever made, was re-edited 15 years later because one astrophysicist noticed the sky was wrong. That is either the most impressive act of perfectionism in cinema history or the most unnecessary, probably both. The water temperature. The actual Atlantic water on the night of the sinking was approximately 28 degrees Fahrenheit below freezing, kept liquid by the salt content. Cameron's tank water was significantly warmer than this, but it was still cold enough to cause real physical distress. The actor's breath is visible in many scenes, and that's not CGI. That's real vapor from real cold. Winslet has said the water scenes were the most physically miserable experience of her career. She got pneumonia. She chipped a bone in her elbow. She said she would never work with Cameron again. The fact that the most intimate scene in the film, the scene where Jack sees Rose for who she truly is, was performed by the director's hands rather than the actor's, is a detail that I find oddly moving. Cameron drew Rose, not Jack. Cameron saw her first. There's one more thing I want to say about this film before I let you go, and it's about the ending, not the door, not the debate about whether Jack could have survived. I mean, the actual ending. The final scene, where old Rose lies in her bed on the research vessel, closes her eyes, and we see the Titanic restored to its full glory. The lights are on, the paint is fresh. The passengers are alive, and Jack is standing at the top of the grand staircase, waiting for her. That scene can be read two ways. Either Rose has died and is reuniting with Jack in the afterlife, or she is dreaming her final dream, her best dream, the one where the ship never sank and the boy at the top of the stairs never let go. Cameron has never confirmed which interpretation is correct. He's been asked. He's dodged the question every time. And I think that's intentional, because the ambiguity is the point. The scene works whether Rose is dying or dreaming, because both readings lead to the same emotional conclusion after 84 years. Rose has never stopped loving Jack. The boy she knew for 3 days on a sinking ship became the defining relationship of her life. Not because 3 days was enough time to build a real relationship, but because 3 days was enough time to change who she was. Jack didn't give Rose a lifetime of love. He gave her 3 days of freedom, and she spent the next 84 years living the life those 3 days made possible. That is why people cry at Titanic. Not because a ship sinks, not because a boy drowns, because the film understands something true about human connection, that some people change your life in a moment. And the moment doesn't have to be long to be permanent. 3 days, 3 hours, 3 seconds of eye contact across a crowded deck. That's all it takes. The rest is just everything that happens after the door. I have to address this because it is, without exaggeration, the single most debated plot point in cinema history. Could Jack have survived by climbing onto the floating door with Rose? Would the door have supported both of them? Cameron has addressed this multiple times over the decades. In 2023, he commissioned a full scientific study complete with stunt performers, body temperature sensors, and a replica of the door to determine once and for all whether both Jack and Rose could have fit on the door and survived. The conclusion? They could have both fit on the door. But given the water temperature and the duration of exposure, only one of them would have survived long enough for rescue. If Jack had climbed on, his body temperature would have dropped below survivable levels before the lifeboat arrived. He would have died on the door instead of in the water. The result is the same. The method is different. Cameron's response to the 25-year debate was characteristically blunt. Jack had to die. The movie is about sacrifice. If Jack lives, the movie doesn't work. He's right. But that hasn't stopped anyone from arguing about the door, and it probably never will. And the fact that this debate has persisted for nearly 3 decades, that people are still angry about a fictional character's death in a film released when Bill Clinton was president, tells you something about how deeply Titanic embedded itself into the emotional architecture of an entire generation. We don't argue about the doors in other films. We don't debate the physics of other fictional deaths. But Jack's death feels personal to millions of people because Cameron made it personal. He spent 3 hours making you love Jack Dawson, and then he killed him in the coldest, most plausible way possible. And he didn't apologize for it, and he never will. The fact that the debate centers on a door, an ordinary object. A piece of wood floating in water is itself poetic. The Titanic was the most extraordinary object ever built. It was destroyed by the most ordinary thing in the ocean ice. And Cameron killed his hero with the most ordinary object in the wreckage, a door. Ordinary objects in this film carry extraordinary weight. The silverware that tells you about class, the china that tells you about wealth, the hand on the foggy window that tells you about intimacy, the door that tells you about sacrifice. She worked with him again on Avatar, The Way of Water, 25 years later. Some directors, you can't quit. Even when they give you pneumonia, the cost. Adjusting for inflation, the Titanic cost approximately $6.5 million to build in 1912. Adjusting for inflation, James Cameron's Titanic cost approximately $200 million to build in 1997. The movie cost roughly 30 times more than the actual ship. Cameron spent more money recreating the Titanic than the White Star Line spent building it. Let that sink in. No pun intended. Actually, full pun intended, ordinary things made sacred by the story that touches them. There is one detail I haven't mentioned that I want to end on. In the final shot of the film, the camera sweeps over old Rose's bedside table. You can see photographs of her life after the Titanic. She's on a horse. She's at a roller coaster. She's in front of a biplane. She did everything Jack told her she would do. She lived the life he imagined for her. Every photograph is a fulfilled promise. A promise made by a boy she knew for 3 days on a ship that doesn't exist anymore. Jack gave Rose 72 hours. Rose turned those 72 hours into 84 years. That is not a love story. That is a life story. And the life was possible because of the love. And the love was only possible because of the loss. The ocean doesn't care about any of it. The ocean just is. Cold and dark and patient. But it means everything to the woman in the bed. And it means everything to us. There's a shot in the film that I think about more than any other. It's near the end. The rescue ship has arrived. Rose is on board, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the Statue of Liberty through the rain. She looks up, the camera holds on her face, and for a moment, just a moment, she looks like a woman who is simultaneously the oldest and youngest person on earth. She has lost everything. She has survived everything. She is 17 years old and she is ancient. That single shot Rose's face, the rain. The statue contains the entire film. Loss and survival, grief and freedom, the end of one life and the beginning of another. That is Titanic. Not the ship, not the iceberg, not the door. A face in the rain, looking at something that means a new beginning, carrying the weight of everything that had to be destroyed to make that beginning possible. If you're still awake at this point, you've done better than most of the passengers in steerage. If you've drifted off somewhere between the musicians playing on deck and Cameron's hands drawing a portrait of a woman who would become the most painted fictional character since Mona Lisa, that's fine too. That's what this was for. The ship will still be here when you wake up. It's been here for over 100 years. It's not going anywhere, and neither apparently, is the argument about the door. There's always more lore to tell. I'll be here when you come back. The iceberg. The iceberg in the film is a combination of practical and digital effects. The initial impact, the scraping along the hull, was filmed using a real hydraulic rig that pushed the actors sideways as the ship struck the ice. The sound of the impact, that grinding, scraping, metallic scream was created by sound designers who recorded themselves dragging various objects across sheets of metal and ice. They tried dozens of combinations before finding the right sound. The final version is a mix of a metal sled dragged across frozen asphalt and the sound of a cargo container being scraped with a chain. It sounds like the death of something very large, which is what it is. The lifeboats. Cameron was obsessive about the lifeboat details. The Titanic carried 20 lifeboats, enough for approximately half the people on board. This was not an oversight. It was policy. Maritime law at the time did not require enough lifeboats for all passengers. The law was based on tonnage, not passenger count. The Titanic exceeded the legal requirement by 4 boats. It still wasn't enough. Cameron includes this detail in the film, a brief exchange where Andrews tells Rose that there aren't enough boats, and he lets it land without editorial comment. The fact speaks for itself. The system was designed to be insufficient, and nobody noticed until it was too late. The third-class gates? One of the most controversial aspects of the film is the depiction of third-class passengers being locked behind gates during the sinking, prevented from reaching the boat deck while first-class passengers boarded lifeboats. Historians have debated whether this actually happened. The evidence is mixed. Some survivor accounts describe locked gates. Others do not. What is not debated is the statistical outcome. A significantly higher percentage of first-class passengers survived than third-class passengers, whether gates were locked or merely unattended. The class system on the Titanic functioned as a sorting mechanism for survival. Money bought access to the boat deck. Poverty bought access to the water. Cameron's depiction may be dramatized, but the underlying truth that your chances of survival on the Titanic depended heavily on how much you paid for your ticket is historically accurate. The violin. Wallace Hartley's violin, the instrument he allegedly played as the ship went down, was found in an attic in 2006. It had been in a leather case monogrammed with Hartley's initials. The instrument was authenticated through forensic analysis and sold at auction in 2013 for £900,000. A violin that may or may not have been played during the most famous maritime disaster in history, sold for nearly $1 million. The power of objects to carry stories is one of the strangest and most human qualities we possess. A violin is a piece of wood and string, but a violin that was played while a ship sank becomes something else entirely. It becomes a relic, a piece of the last song ever played for 1,500 people who were about to die. The drawing. When Jack draws Rose, the hands you see holding the charcoal are Cameron's, not DiCaprio's. Cameron is left-handed, so the footage was mirror flipped to make the drawing appear right-handed. Cameron drew all of the artwork in Jack's sketchbook. He was a professional artist before he was a filmmaker. He worked as an art director and production designer in his early career.